Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Searching for Political Identity. I am your humble host, Brian Escow. As always, it's a pleasure to be with you, and I thank you very much for being here. So today's a big day for me. I wish I could say it's the first time that I'm waiting to get the results from the California bar exam, but it is the second time. So let me very quickly give you my history with taking the bar exam. So first of all, in 2018, I got a little restless with my construction management job, which I still have, which I'm extremely grateful for. And I got myself into law school. Was fortunate to get into the University of San Diego School of Law, and I just absolutely loved it. It changed my life for the better. It helped me mature. I mean, it was just instrumental for me in so many ways. It helped me learn about this great society that I always loved, but really didn't know too much about. And as I've said many times, it nudged me to the right, the core curriculum of law school. And of course, as I've said many times, studying critical race theory in my final year of law school and over two electives really pushed me further to the right. But I graduated from law school in 2022 and I was going to take the bar exam. I was getting ready. I was in the middle of studying for it, although I wasn't studying very well for it. I guess that would have been July of 22. And my dad got very, very ill about halfway through. I was only about 20% through the material. I should have been at least halfway through it by that time. But my dad really almost died. It was very, very serious. Fortunately, he made a full recovery. He got uh, an infection from a surgery to remove a tumor, a cancerous tumor from his throat. And the infection is what really almost killed him. It was really crazy. So thank God he's okay. By the way, I share a birthday with my dad and Joe Biden coming up on November 20th. I digress. I canceled the bar exam, which was an out I desperately needed. I felt strange about it at the time, but now that my dad's healthy, I can say, you really bailed me out, Dad. Thank you. Um, and then the following year, I was in the middle of a really ugly breakup. My first big breakup, really, with my ex who I'd been with for 2 years, and I was not in a good place. And I once again barely studied, and I came really close to passing. Really, really close to passing. So this time I did work a lot harder, and I will be not disappointed or bummed. Of course, I'll be bummed and disappointed, but fortunately, I don't have my job riding on this. I'm one of the lucky few. I don't really need this credential. I've got the degree. I'd like to say that I passed the bar exam, and I'm going to do it. And hopefully I did it this time. But I don't really need it. But this time I studied much more. The problem is the way they tested the material this time. There's so much material they could choose from. There's like 1,000 things you need to know, let's say, and they test you on 10 of them. And so this time I feel like the material was more obscure, and I actually feel oddly less confident, at least about the essays. There's essays and then multiple choice. I feel more confident on the multiple choice, but strangely less confident on the essays. But I'm hoping that even though I was less familiar with the material, the fact that I studied more actually will put me in a good position. So we'll find out tonight. And if I have to end up taking the bar exam for a third time, then I will. But I'd really like to avoid that. So today's a big day for me. There's no doubt about it. Um, like I did last year when I was entering my final stretch for studying for it, for 3-4 months ago, I was chain smoking cigarettes and just the height of pressure, man. It's extremely, what I will say about the bar exam is, look, I coasted through law school. I always coasted through everything. I'll be honest with you. It's one of my problems. It's one of the reasons I'm searching for political identity, searching for identity at large, because I so often in life have breezed through things, and that's not how you find yourself. So getting into law school was a big deal for me. And I did breeze through it, and I wish I worked harder. But what I can tell you is that you can breeze through it if you're a person of average intelligence. The bar exam you can't breeze through. It is like 11 law exams in one, no notes, and they're hard exams. They're 11 hard exams. So it's a serious thing. So that's the bar exam. Now the election. So as you may know, I've always voted for Democrats. Obama, Hillary, and Joe, but this time I voted for Trump and he won. And so my journey it's been an interesting ride. It's not over, but I hit a big milestone and I picked the right team. And so how do I feel about the election? I feel good, to be honest with you. I feel damn good. I feel a little numb, a little happy numb, a little positive shock. Um, but Trump won. I saw through the bullshit, it turns out. Now, of course, the fact that he won doesn't mean that what was happening to him was bullshit, but I think it was, and it turns out a majority of Americans thought it was too. So feels pretty good. I'll be honest with you. Trump and his movement have been maligned for so long. The guy's not perfect. Who is? My God. And you could point to some things that are ugly about his past, but that's his personal life. And I honestly don't care that much. I was always much more concerned in the results and just a black and white comparison of Trump and Biden's presidencies. Although I don't say Biden's was a total failure, it was pretty obvious where this was going. The media lies, the malignment, like I said, of the MAGA movement, the critical race theory, the unhinged narratives from the left. Too far. They went too far and they pushed people like me into Trump's arms. And it turns out there were more of me than they would have preferred. So that's what happened. And so this leads me into my guest for today. This is a conversation I had about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago with a friend from X. He's not a famous person, but he's a good person. He's an educator. He's really a polymath. He's got, if you look at his bio on X, he's been all over the world teaching. He's a big follower of Jesus Christ, which was a big part of our conversation. He's done a lot. He's an engineer, so he's a smart man. He's a well-studied man. He's a man of many talents, and he shared about an hour with me, and we just basically the theme of our conversation was he saw me struggling to justify and reconcile with the fact that I've undergone this political shift, and he said, "Brian, don't question yourself, brother. You're a good person. I'm going to tell you why you're a good person, and MAGA's good people, and let me tell you why you should follow Jesus and help you with your journey." So this was very much an optimistic conversation, a friendly conversation, a religious conversation. He was trying to teach me about the way of Jesus, and he wasn't shy about that. But it was about helping me find myself. He said, "I see you, Brian, searching for your identity, your political identity. But first, you got to find out who you think you are. Who are you? Are you God's son, or are you some random mammal?" So it was a pleasure hosting him, and I hope you find the conversation as stimulating as I did. The real thing I want to say to my audience is, obviously, it's not fair for me to say this is MAGA and compare it to the portrayal of MAGA that you've been hearing on the mainstream media for all these years. But I do think this is a decent representative of the MAGA mindset. It's rational, it's faith based. And I know those two might seem like juxtapositions, but it's a rational, reasonable, faith based, common sense lover of people. And I think the big takeaway for me now that I am recalling what we spoke about was to be externally focused. And so much of my journey, even though I've been interviewing guests and trying, but it's all about finding what I am going to be, who I am. And it's a necessary journey. And so I'm not uncomfortable with how self-centered my journey has been. It's my journey. I got to take it, and I'm seeking help. But eventually I understand from the conversation with Mac, my guest, and conversations I've had with life coaches that I happen to be good friends with, very successful fitness and lifestyle guys. They say you got to take accountability, and you got to scratch that. You got to be externally focused. Accountability, yes, but the point is you got to be externally focused. And when you can do that, that's when you start changing the world. And by the way, that's how you change your life. So be externally focused, Brian. Be confident in who you are. I'm just talking to myself at this point. I'm going to have to continue soul searching on the religious front because I'm very spiritual and I'm leaning more into religion as I get older, but I don't know. All I know is that I felt like Trump was the right choice. I did it. I feel good about it. We won. Now I have to figure out, does this mean I'm a Republican now? Am I MAGA? Am I religious now? Do I want to embrace my Judaism? Do I want to pursue learning about Jesus? A lot of questions to figure out, but at the end of the day, I'm going to eventually have to get to a point where even if I don't figure it out totally, I got to start shining this light outward and think about other people and helping them. whether that turns me into a MAGA socialist or a MAGA libertarian. You know, which way forward at this point? Is it Javier Milei or is it Ron DeSantis? You know what I'm saying? A lot of questions to figure out, but this is a good start. And I thank Mac for joining me, and I hope you enjoy it. Take care. Hey, Makala, welcome to the program, man.
Hey, nice to be here, Brian. Great to meet you across the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So you reached out to me. You saw me going through a political identity journey, shall I say? Better to call it a journey than a
Right.
crisis. And you see that I've landed on Trump,
Right.
and you're kind of a new follower to me, I think. I've gained
Right.
all these followers since I made that decision, and so much has changed for me in that time period. So I'm looking forward to getting your
Mm,
guidance on learning a little bit about you, introducing our audience to you, learning about you, and then getting your guidance on my journey so far and in the last 2 months, because it's been a very different thing now in the last two
sure.
months. So first, let me ask you to tell me a little bit about yourself, please.
Great. And thanks for having me. I'll give you the intro I often give in a 30-second elevator is if I showed you my CV, you might call BS and ask for receipts. I've just been so blessed to be able to live around the world. So I'm a U.S. citizen, born in Ohio, moved to Arizona in 1972, something like that. Um, Went through high school, but then I just had kind of that wanderlust. Had grown up in a Christian community, and so took a trip to Australia for 3 months to work and do some nonprofit type or NGO type work. And boy, I got the bug. So I came back, finished college. My undergrad's in theology and education, and got the opportunity to go in as a embedded contractor with the U.S. Army during Desert Storm. So I was thankful. I thought maybe I'd never go military, but I would have broken the fifth generation in our family that goes back all the way to the Civil War in the North. So, in fact, my grandfather was officer of the day the Pentagon opened. Went into Ryder
Mm.
Woods. Just an honor. Just those little things you can put on as well. Anyway, came back again. Got into high tech and Intel Corporation. I was a kind of an underling in terms of level, but I was a senior engineer in the executive office, helping them build out not their factories, but all the stuff around the factories that would need to be used. Um, get to about 1999, went through some uh, difficult times, just family issues, and I chose a path that led me into alcohol addiction. And
Mm.
I heard a lot of people. A lot of times I teach or talk around the world or whatever, and people, oh, you're so great. But I always try to open up with, um, I don't think I'm better than anybody. I've tried to make my amends over the past 15 years, and
Mm.
by the grace of God, living healthy and all of that stuff, and living free. So that's great. But I got back from that and got recruited into Google in their AdWords division. That's their main kind of, that's how they make their money. That's the revenue
Right.
thing is all the ad clicks and stuff. Spent some time with that and got this crazy opportunity to marry this amazing woman named Melinda who speaks 10 languages and was living overseas. And both of us were looking for the possibility of marriage. We did that, and I went to Indonesia as they brought me on first as just that, English teacher overseas thing. But then quickly that turned into they asked me to actually teach their agama program. And weird thing is that in Indonesia it's illegal to be an atheist, and we also
Mm.
worked in China where it was illegal basically, um, to promote
Mm.
any religion. So, anyways, there teaching
Mm.
apologetics and philosophy that had been an avocation with me. 1978. I don't know if you've ever heard of Francis Schaeffer. He wrote a book called "Whatever Happened to the Human Race." Kind of a late 20th century philosopher, and it woke me to this, hey, what's going on in the world? So 1978, and really for years on through, and studying theology and things like that, this has kind of been my passion to understand not just, what's the right answer, but why. And for somebody that they can stand, and two brothers can have differing opinions, but they can find their common ground and that sort of thing. I came back from overseas after also teaching in China. I was in Indonesia for 3 years, then we taught in China for 3 years, and then a religious freedom law, which was really more restrictions on religion in China, ended up being a situation where guys like me that were Westerners and teaching Western politics and philosophy and things like that were no longer welcome. Came back here. I work for Wells Fargo, and I'm a senior systems engineer in their auto division. We run, all the $87 billion portfolio for all of that. Obviously, it's a big team, but we're right out on platform support. And I've just kept writing. Farther out into the theological, I'm working on a commentary on Romans. Written a lot of articles, got some guys that I spar with and that sort of thing. Aside from that, 6 wonderful kids. One is 34, married, a couple of kids living in Michigan. I got twin sons that are 34. One's a soldier. He's a staff sergeant in the Army and hangs his feet off the back of those CH-47s. He's that guy as a crew chief on those. His brother's a fireman. His younger sister is a trauma nurse. I'm not sure how we raised so many rescuers, but that was great. Another beautiful daughter with is an artist in Indianapolis, and then we got a 17-year-old in the home. So I've had a kid in the house since 1990.
Wow. Well, you're almost an empty nester. It's so close. You deserve it.
We did go on vacation last weekend, our first one, for just a couple of days. We got away.
Good for you.
So that's a little bit about me, and there you go.
So interesting. You got a strong family, man. 6 generations now in the Army. So that's incredible. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining me. So you had an idea for a starting point for this chat, a little model. Talk about establishing a worldview, some questions, some basic questions, because after all, I've had a few guests about religion, not enough. So I love having people with a religious angle on, because searching for political identity is so much more obviously deeper than that. It's searching for identity. And so you suddenly get to spiritual and religious matters very quickly. It's such an important thing.
They kind of bump into each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with this model, and you can address it however you want. But the first question is, for example, who made me? As in, what is our origin? Why am I here? Meaning, what is right morality, identity? Who am I? Destiny? What happens to the world? What happens to me when I die? And you say it's important that we start with this model because it sets the stage for understanding why people are attracted to various political views, as you just alluded to. So, what would you like to? What wisdom can you bless upon me, sir, about that idea?
Thanks. I think the biggest point is that worldviews are really more like glasses. I wear prescription glasses. I'm kind of blind without them and stuff. But if I'm wearing them all day and I'm on a screen and they're clean and all of that, I don't quite notice them. Right. Or it's like you're breathing, and sometimes you notice that you're breathing, and then most of the time you don't. Right. Your body just breathes. And so I think talking about worldview is also just discovering, well, not am I looking at this right, but how am I looking at it? And that's kind of a grown-up thing, right? The modern term is mindful, right? Just asking. I want to ask myself the question, okay, where do I get my answers on origin? Because that's a pretty big question, right? How did we get here? And if that answer is something other than completely random, then it gets really interesting, right? And we quickly have to start to say, well, if then, you can go down all the questions from the first principle of like, where did it come from? So when we're looking at worldview, once we realize, hey, I've got some goggles on, and if it comes from first principles on that origin question, did somebody make me? Then what's my relationship to that? That gets you pretty quickly into the next question of what is life about? Now, I'm not one to say that you cannot have meaning if you have a view that say you're an atheist. There's great utility arguments or just common decency arguments. You look at how Isaac Asimov wrote and things like that all the way in his early years. Very genteel, very moral, although he would look you right in the face and say, no, I don't believe in God.
Right.
And then in terms of that, like, what's the meaning of life and did God make me? The question is then, how much do you believe in God? How big of a deal is it in your life? But get honest about it. Oh, I go to church all the time, but I'm really lying and I haven't been there for 6 years. I'm just saying it to somebody, right? But in my own heart of hearts, how deep am I into that? And I think you've read any of Richard Dawkins? He's a
No,
atheist
no,
writer.
I know of
That's
him.
okay. Yeah, kind of famous, but he has a
Oh yeah.
great scale. He's got the Dawkins out of his book, The God Delusion. He's got a scale, which is basically, and if I get it wrong, all your viewers can correct me in the comments. But a one is somebody that doesn't believe in God. They know there's a God, and they operate in such a way that they believe that they're in actual conscious contact with a higher power, and it's not a matter of belief. They feel like they're experiencing it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then Dawkins works his way down the path to 7, I believe, which is I'm an absolute atheist and I'm so sure of it, I'm going to live like it. And I don't have any concerns about any accountability or karma or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for somebody to get there. Hey, I'm in the middle of the road. I don't know. Okay, but say that, right? We can say that to ourselves. And once we get that kind of squared away, you get into meaning. We always hear the joke of the meaning of life is it's so hard to find, but some religious models actually throw something in there. In Judeo-Christian tradition, the idea is that you love God with everything you got, and you love people the same way, just like you love yourself. Right? All of a sudden, you go, well, that's not a bad framework, but what is love? And I use Thomas Aquinas' version of the working definition of love, and that is that love is willing the good of the other as other. In other words, simply because that person is in front of me, they are now someone for whom I'm going to act with goodwill towards. So it gets the feelings out of it. But if you test it, it's the same thing with my wife, right? Oh, honey, I love you. And maybe, we have a great night or something like that. But it's the same thing. I want the best for her. I want to take her out on a date. I want to do good things for her. That person in the street who's about to get run over by a car. Well, there's not a whole lot of kissy feely emotion there, but the same thing that's love is, yeah, dang it, we got to try to go save that kid. Let's go. And both of those things are love if you simplify it down to that. What was the next one I had on the list? Meaning, morality, identity. Well, I think that's another question that we kind of run around, and sometimes we think my identity are the things that I do. And part of that is true, but I think my identity is how do I fit in the world? What's my relationship to the world? What's my
what's my role?
Meaning of life is how do I relate and fit? Because I think everything is about relationships, whether it's linguistic or political or engineering, all of that. How can I relate to the world? And once I understand that, for example, the Confucian model, it talks about society works great when you know who you are and you do whatever you are to the best of your ability. So if you're a gardener, man, make those rows straight. If you're a king, serve your people with everything that you have, right? So that's a Confucian model, and it brought a lot of order to places like
That's what I
China
hear
for a lot of years.
That's what I hear from a guy who I know who's really well known in the fitness and life coaching space. And, the message is from a lot of those guys is whether you're a waiter or you're changing doorknobs or you're making punch lists or you're flipping burgers, be the best at what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that is certainly the first step to finding peace.
Sure. And it's not just duty. Think about that. The guy that's serving you something is not just some peon. He may be of lower station, but guess what? We honor him for his service, right? And we do that in the West too. We give people tips. Christianity says that, especially in the New Testament, is this model that through Jesus dying, he purchased the ability for anybody that wanted to be adopted into the family of God. Now, I don't know how literal that is. I don't know what it looks like. But the idea being, hey, God's not way over here and I'm down here and God's up there trying to hit me with a stick and I have to perform instead, hey, God says I'm his son, right? That's just in the Christian model. Or in the Jewish model, you see David out in the Psalms, just communing with God in his presence, right? And so they know their identity is that I'm not alone in the universe. How I relate to the universe is through love that's empowered by my creator. That's usually a religious model. And even with righteous Muslims, we lived in Indonesia for 3 years. Not everybody in the world is like what we see in certain radical places around the world. I want to make no comment on whether it's right or wrong or anything like that. So you get to meaning. But once you have a meaning of life, you go, okay, what do I do? Does that make sense?
Right.
You know, so what's moral?
What's the destiny?
Right. Well, moral first. What's right? What's wrong? But why? I'll give you an extreme logic example. You're practicing lawyer now? I forgot.
Not practicing yet. No, I get the results actually in like 2 weeks. The bar exam.
Dude, so. I'm right there with you. My uncle was the associate dean of the law school at University of Arizona. Believe it or not, won 2 Supreme Court cases in his career out of 3. So
amazing.
Yeah, we had a bunch of people in our family that were lawyers, then some academics, then some medical, then some engineering.
That's awesome. I have a cousin.
And welders, by the way. I mean, pipe fitters.
Okay, beautiful.
Awesome.
Nice spread there. I got a cousin who's successfully argued 2 cases in front of the Supreme Court as well. So very cool. Verified heir. We know people.
I know. I can't even imagine walking into that room, let alone presenting a cogent argument without just like melting. Nice to see you, Justice Thomas.
Right.
You too. Anyway,
so morality, the why.
Morality. Why is something right or wrong? And here's your extreme logic example. And that is everything that happened under the Third Reich, under Nazi Germany, was legal by virtue of the Bundestag having voted and duly entered all of their final plans for the Jews, etc. Right in their parliament. And so you can say, well, it's legal, but we obviously get to a question of, is it right or is it wrong? Right. And obviously the great goal of law, when possible, is to bring justice and, to bring about what's right. But just because the law gets passed doesn't mean it's right. That's why we have courts. We have to think through that. And so I challenge students as they're looking into that, I'm doing this and we're at like 22 minutes. I'm doing this over weeks. We're walking through these things, exercising, figuring out definitions of, understanding their identity under their worldview. I was in international schools where I had kids all over the place. So it wasn't like, Max preaching. It was more, if you understand who you are, every other decision gets better. So if you come to a place, here's what I think. There's an objective God. I'm just going to use my model. There's an objective God. He's personal. I'm accountable to him. He's reached out to have a relationship with me. Okay, so what's God like? Well, I can look in the Bible and it's like, well, he's lots of cool things. He wants to do good for people. He wants to change nations for justice. All these things, whether it's literature or not, I believe it's true, but I understand if you just look at it as good literature, it's a pretty good way to run the world in the vast majority of those passages. And then I start to say, well, once again, why is it right or wrong? And it just goes back to the same question of love. It simply comes down to, is life going to be focused on me and only what I want? Hey, we all have needs. Go for it. Get your needs met. Go have your pleasures. I'm not talking about just, having some stuff, but a life where we start to curve in on each other, in on ourselves, incurvatus in se, said Irenaeus. Something sort of happens. And I don't know if you've ever been in that headspace, right? I'm all mad at somebody and I can't think straight. And suddenly we all do it, right? It's our ego. We have to have an ego. You need to stay alive, right? You need to present your needs. You need to defend yourself.
Mm.
You should have an ego. But when that becomes the primary thing, if I'm just always in prowler mode, it's all about me, my life really starts to close in.
Mm.
And if I live a life that is the opposite, where I'm just looking outwards, Thomas Aquinas, I'm presented with somebody in my range of view, and I just say, maybe the love there is just, hey, how you doing? Or staying quiet because they're on the phone and I don't want to interrupt them. Maybe that was love, right?
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, I'm spending my whole day just kind of noticing other people. I'm fitting right in,
Right.
and I kind of forget about myself, and my day is lighter. I
That's
think
so
that
funny that you
gets,
say that too, because that's the other main nugget that I get from my friend is to be externally focused and to brighten other people's day. And once you realize that how you affect somebody, could affect their entire life,
yeah,
you change your behavior.
I think you're absolutely right. I've had times in a classroom where it's been the positive, and it's also been, I may have said something. I was a little short. I was thinking about, I want to get to lunch. Some kid asked me a question, from a first principle. For them, this is the first time they've ever seen this stuff. And I give some short answer or dismissive or whatever. And you can see they just wilt. And what was it? I was too concerned about getting my jelly donut downstairs. And so
Right.
what? I got a nice jelly donut. But what happened? Right? I could have gotten both. I could have stopped for 30 more seconds, smiled, answered the question, make sure that the kid was happy about it, then got my donut. Right? It's kind of win. I think it's about win-win. So when you get to why is it right or wrong, I think your switch is to say, of course, I'm not talking about general needs and self-survival and even self-interest. Those are normal things. But if my motivation for doing something becomes only about me, and all of a sudden my feelings of power are more important than the ruining I might do to their career by whatever, online or some spurious lawsuit or something like that. And I think that's a great switch to figure out in any religious model and any philosophical model is how much of it is about me. Um,
Mm.
Once again, if you're in a fire, it's all about you. Get your ass out of the building. Um, but we're talking about, in regular life, am I just walking around turned in on myself, or am I going, hey, there's my teammates around me. Oh, my son's calling me. I need to help him, or whatever. Just living
Mm.
that life. So then you've come through, like, how'd I get here? Um, what is the meaning of all of that? Why would God even make me? The Christian model and even the Islamic model and even your circular models that would have reincarnation in them and things coming out of India are that one day you could be joined to that creator in a real and tangible way and
Mm.
and live out what people would call heaven. I
Right.
get to be with God and all sorts of wonderful people, and I don't know what it's look like, but it's gonna be great.
Right.
um or if you're an atheist, look, I don't know, like, I'm a 6, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm living like I'm an atheist. But I know this: I want to leave good stuff for my kids. I don't want to leave anything embarrassing that other people might find. But mostly in my career, I'd like to be able to look back and say, I can lay down because if it's true, I'm laying my head down on my pillow for the last time,
Mm.
and that's it. Can I, in that 5 minutes, say, aside from the 14 quintillion failures and times I've lost it and all of that, did I honestly try to do good for others? Did I honestly try to love for them? Not just self sacrifice, not just being ethical, not just being
Mm.
legal, but did I try to do good for my mankind and all mankind? And I think for somebody who's in that would be a terrible thing for an atheist to be lying their head down in the last minute and say, you know what, that was stupid. I made it all about myself.
Right.
That would be sad. Um, I think too, the idea of what's going to happen to the world, the destiny side,
Mm.
is the Christian and Islamic and Jewish traditions. All three have this idea of an anointed king who
Mm.
will return to the earth and make things right. and that kingdom will be full of righteousness, joy, peace, kindness, just all the things
All the
we
good
really
stuff.
want. I believe it's true, but I sure do hope it's true too.
Right.
Now, but if that's true for a Christian, that starts to do something. Look at Paul in the New Testament. Go read the book of Romans if you just want to read a great legal argument for the Christian faith. So when you look at Paul, as we were mentioning, he was a member of the ruling council of the Jewish state at the time. It was a legislative body called the Sanhedrin. There were 70 leaders of Israel, and the Roman whatever they call them, the Roman Curia, had allowed certain states to have some independence. I think maybe the example of Indian nations having some of their own autonomy. And he went through a time where he saw the rise of this Christian faith and who's this Jesus. And at the time, it was pretty threatening to the Jewish tradition. And people were not convinced at first until they were able to be given evidence. And then you had a lot of converts. That's what they say on Pentecost, right? About 5,000 or 3,000 people decided, yeah, this is, I know the evidence is true. I want to be part of this. But Paul was out there, I think earnestly in his own, he's going through his worldview, right? He's going through his view of what scripture says, his view of what God is like, his view of what he believes about the people of Israel, because it says that they're his treasured and peculiar possession, his segula, right? And so Paul's sitting there saying, wait a minute, is God doing this? So he's persecuting the Christian church, the early Christian church. And that gets to a point where he actually is the authority at a stoning of one of the first Christian missionaries, a young guy named Stephen. And so he actually sat there and was the guy that gave the order and held the coats and signed the papers to one of the first Christian martyrs. And so he's doing this, and somehow, though, he has a very scripture says there's this incredible spiritual experience where he sees something and is blinded by a great light, and basically God says to him, hey, you're done, because what I'm trying to tell you is that Christianity doesn't go against Judaism. It's the completion of Judaism, and that Jesus is that Messiah, that anointed king. And all of a sudden he converts. Like, what? In like he tells the story. In 5 minutes he converts. He goes through this incredible fasting and stuff for 3 or 4 days, whatever. And he goes out though for 14 years and kind of unlearns Judaism, but is working with Jewish rabbis to say, if this is true and Jesus is really who he is, what does it mean? So he had to go, for him, it was a 14-year refocusing of, okay, go through those questions. What do I really believe? And as you can imagine, as he came back in supporting Christians, almost like Robert F. Kennedy becoming a Trump supporter, right? Everybody on his side turned on him. He was persecuted, and then he was persecuted because it was part of this Christianity thing. And it says, though, he had just finished up that time in the desert. 2 Corinthians 12, he says, suddenly I was having this vision. And so he's probably having a dream, right? And he has this dream, though, of like how beautiful it's all going to be in the end. My destiny's good. I'm pretty, I feel very confident in this. And then he was having all of these attacking things and stuff. And there's this just incredible verse at the end of 2 Corinthians 12 where he says, suddenly I realized that in my weakness, I am strong. And for him, he had this epiphany of like, this is really hard, but everything's going to be okay. And he had this vision of the future, and that helped him push all the way through. He fought court cases. He was moved from different venues to different venues. He ended up having a situation where he was about to get executed, but his family had bought his Roman citizenship, and so he appealed to Caesar. And going through, he wrote a lot of his letters actually from prison cells and things. And there's just this joyous dude sitting in a Roman prison writing these letters and people visiting him, and he's trying to help people learn about the faith and stuff. And he just kept going. I mean, he was in shipwrecks. He got bit by I'd kind of be out after a year or two, right?
Right.
No more shipwrecks, no more anything. And I don't know what he saw, but his confidence in his destiny gave him courage for the journey. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Right.
And it can do that for us too. And some
Right.
people say, well, it's a fantasy. There can't be any afterlife or anything. But I kind of want to get there just like the atheist. If it's that way, could I lay my head down on the pillow and say, I tried? I don't know if you ever saw that movie, Saving Private
Sure.
Ryan.
Oh yeah.
And you get to the end, and every dad who's had 5 kids, especially some of them who've gone off and been in war and all of that, where at the end he looks up at his wife and he says, just tell me I was a good wife, right? Please tell me, because he doubts it, right? He's looking back all the way through that movie, all the mistakes that happened and all of it, and he says, tell me I was a good man. I think and we want to get to the end of our life and be able to, with all our failures, to say, yeah, I died trying. And if you're saying that's my goal at the end of my life, then that starts to form your ethics, your code of conduct, the language that you're going to use, how you present yourself to people, etc. So I think once I'm like, okay, I don't have to believe like Mac or like Brian Esco, but I need to know what I believe and why I believe it, or at least have a rough estimation. And it's amazing though, once you have that, you start to have a rubric through which you can filter logical, reasonable, even emotional questions. Why do I feel this way? Well, maybe I'm scared about death, or maybe I feel like I'm useless in the universe, or maybe I don't know what to do. What's right? What's wrong? Right? Okay, great. But at least you've identified it. And it's not just that gnawing that can go around in a teenager's soul. It's like, I don't even know what to do. Right? I don't know why to do it. I don't know about God. It's all a jumble. And if you lay those things in there, you can get. I just realized my camera's a little.
No.
Anyway, that's the point. Having those things in place, try any logical test, and it fails in certain places, but try any logical test. If you can have a sense of your answer to those questions, then you'll almost start to say, well, duh, now I know what my political beliefs are.
Right. I was going to say, presumably,
Yeah.
the what you're alluding to is that the worldview, if you're a believer, you're going to
Right.
lean to a conservative or a Republican worldview.
Well, at this time in history,
Right.
right?
Right. Tell me a little bit about that.
I think the thing that where we've gotten to is that Scripture has some limits. Just the Christian worldview, Muslim too, it has some limits on sexual behavior, moral behavior,
Right.
and things that we're currently experimenting with outside of those boundaries. Transgender surgeries, especially for minors, extended rights to abortion, really pushing sexual, not just sex ed, but kind of agenda type stuff in the school. And so, yes, conservatives are saying, well, look, my understanding is that sexuality is great, but that's outside the bounds of where we're going.
Right.
It's not real. And on top of it, going back to truth, or just, a first question of truth. Is truth inside me? I think we have a world that people saying, almost like Disney or something like that, just look inside yourself, Jiminy Cricket. You'll find it. And sure, we have insights inside ourselves, but we're not finding meaning and all of that, or truth. I have opinions inside of me. Nothing I say here is anything other than opinion. I can't have anything other than that. But if my worldview also says is that truth is eternal, whatever is one, and the value of one is oneness, and those things will be constant throughout at least the life of the universe, with physics and stuff. It's just true. Gravity is true. And Christians would go so far as to say, chromosomes and actual anatomy really are not just features on the body. They're integral to what you are as a human being and to your gender. And let me say clearly on this issue, there are millions of kids around the world that are, born intersex. That's a totally different issue. I'm not talking about these things really happen, and I think the agenda we hear in America right now actually downgrades this problem.
Right.
Parents get born with a kid that is intersex, and then they have to try to figure out what's the best thing for the kid, right? What's the best thing for their path forward, but not just kid goes to a class for a week and he comes home, tells his mom, I feel this way, and suddenly he's on, puberty blockers.
Right.
Christians would say the reason we don't do that is because I'm made in God's image. I'm important. I have a destiny with him. My identity is to go love people instead of being obsessed about myself.
Right.
That gets me to where I am. Now, for sure, a Christian can be a classical liberal. Absolutely. I mean, some of the finest Christian professors I had would have, been voting for Johnson and Kennedy and all of that. So I don't want to just say, liberals aren't Christians, but I would go so far to say is the current DNC platform, which is allowing for abortion up through when the head is crowning in the birth canal. There's really no common ground for Christians to get into, like Clinton said back in the 90s. He said, we want to make it safe, legal, and rare.
Excuse me, rare. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, you know what? People of good conscience can sit there and say, okay, we can talk about what that is. How rare, how safe, how legal, right? People can have that. But where you're at now is, no, we get to kill the baby anytime we want. You can't do anything about it.
Right.
There's not a place to negotiate anymore. There's just no overlap on the table. And I think we can say to people, not meanly, but just say, I'm not sure we have anything to talk about unless you're telling me that somewhere this baby has a chance to live. We don't have, there's no common ground. We can't talk about it. That's just one example. And so I think a worldview suddenly, it's not, oh, the Bible says it. That's the facts. You go read it yourself. It's, well, yeah, I think the Bible's true if I'm a Christian, or the Quran, and the writings of the prophet, may peace be upon him, is I'd look at what I'm running my life by and saying, this is so far outside of that, I can't support it.
Now, does the right-wing Christian position on abortion, does that track with scripture, or is that kind of a result of the worldview that comes from the scripture?
A little of both. The Bible does speak to abortion. For one, it very clearly prioritizes the mother's life over the child within. It also has established a lot. Where did common law get this idea that a baby inside the mother is human? And in fact, there's still criminal charges that can happen. You can have a double murder in certain states for a pregnant woman. And so that idea that baby is alive in you. Psalm 139 says, I knit you together in your mother's womb. I'll just go from my Catholic background. It would pretty much cover it. The idea of life is that we are to do everything reasonable to maintain life the best we know from conception to when a natural end occurs. Catholic doctrine doesn't prohibit anybody from going on, long-term care or, being on a respirator or anything like that, but it wouldn't require it either. Hey, this person we've done pretty much all we know, and we've really tried, and we're not sure he's going to make it. Right. Call a priest. Right. That from that conception, my father was an obstetrician. He says, easy now. Conception is not just like an egg got fertilized, because that could get flushed out in a second. He says that where it actually becomes something is when it first attaches to the side of the womb. He says, once you have an embedded embryo and it's plugged in, that's what we call a zygote. But that's pretty early. So the point is that there could be lots of cells are, fertilized and what have you. But yeah, they may pass out. But once that baby is latched on and we know it's living,
Hmm.
Christian doctrine would say that is a human being that has competing rights
Right.
with the mother who is carrying it. And as such, they're both humans. We have to resolve these problems as though they're both humans. You'll get to the
Right.
ethical dilemmas later of, hey, it's an
But
ectopic
it's about
pregnancy.
starting points, worldviews.
Right, right. And that guides, I think, most Christians who are looking at, it's a life from conception. And so I would argue is that we just don't, it's not right that we would ever interfere in that. However, I could sit down with somebody that says, look, I'm really thinking in the first 2 weeks, there's no viability whatsoever. We need to talk about this. There needs to be a space for the woman who's gone through something, a terrible mistake. Is there a window where we're saying, yeah, it's not really a human yet? Well, you can have that discussion. Two people of goodwill can have that, right? But if it's back to, it's just one way or the other. Hey, we have to be able to actually remove parts of your child's body because they said they're a different gender. You say, no, I can't fit it in there. But at least I know why, and I can still love that person. I can respect them. I might even need to take action against them, but I don't need to be vengeful. I might need to follow up or something.
Yeah, no, we are in modernity, which correlates or is progressivism. A lot of new things, and even if they end up being normal in the future, and I'm not trying to make the argument that they should be. I'm just saying, even
Just
if
if
that
they
were,
are.
even if
Right.
it were to be the case, you could still forgive people for being taken
Oh,
aback by
sure.
what we're experiencing. I mean, these are
Oh,
different times.
absolutely.
The society, I mean, the pace of change, all of that, the lack of religion, all of it, very interesting. I want to ask you, I want to
Sure.
bring it to critical race theory, which was the primary reason that got me
Oh, that's how we
thinking.
got started chatting, right? A couple of months
Well,
ago, I think.
okay, so I didn't even recall that, but the reason I want to switch to it now is because
Yeah.
you first mentioned worldviews are like glasses, and that's exactly how I viewed critical race theory. I say to people,
Right.
look, ultimately I found it controversial and I wouldn't wear those glasses all the time, but it is like
Right.
putting glasses on and you see things through a different way.
Sure.
And there's things to be learned. I mean, there's value to having those glasses on, but it's about what glasses you keep on and live your daily life in. And
Right.
I found
Right.
it to be a bridge too far, and I couldn't. So, whereas I would have always encouraged the studying and spreading of history and all the brutality and
Mm.
suffering that Black people endured,
Oh, absolutely.
um, there's a, that's not CRT, that's history. CRT is saying, okay, in light of that, we need to deconstruct traditional American culture, which is private property rights and minimal
Right.
government, and rebuild it to something that is more suitable for Black people. Obviously, the implied argument being that Black people don't
Right.
thrive in that situation. So, what say you to this idea? Because you're a cultured man, you've traveled, been all over the world. That's really why I'm interested.
Right.
Plus your religious background. What do you think about this culture war and this idea that's traditional American culture is only good for white people? There is this white power built in. Therefore, even though we have the Civil Rights Act and this colorblind legally society, we still have in
Yeah.
effect something that is slanted towards white people. What say you about all of that?
Well, I think the human heart is always going to have bias. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'll be the first to admit that there's a I can move up in my neighborhood a little bit, and it's a little bit rough, and I want to get out and in that part of the neighborhood, and I see a couple of guys who would meet a racial stereotype of how they might dress, what their hair looked like, happen to be Black. My head would be more on a swivel than it was just two young white guys. Now, does that make me racist?
Mm.
Maybe.
Right.
Except two of my kids are
Well,
Black, so I don't know about that.
oh,
But that doesn't make me not a racist.
trump
I get
card.
it.
No.
No, it's like that doesn't make me not. Maybe it makes me. Oh, it makes. I've had people tell me, "Oh, you just have white savior syndrome," and I'm like, I just kind of thought the kid needed to be adopted, so we said yes. Oh no, you're just everything, devolves back to racism, almost like everything ends up is Hitler, whether Godwin's law or something like that on the internet. So what I think about it is this, is that I really believe that what we're seeing is there is some sort of Politburo. They're not completely secret. They're just having their meetings. They're just having their Zoom, but they've got special authority, and they've all decided that a Leninist Marxist model is going to work. Not full takeover of privacy and things like that, but using a racial divide to come in, split the nation. Well, they tried it with, first we had real black racism. I mean, the terrible things in Oklahoma, the thousands of people burned, their cities burned down. I mean, we did some very racist things. But I also know this. I know that was a small proportion of the people. Is that systemic? Yeah, because they're in the system. They're there. And some of them can pull the levers. So I think there were some real reasons to try to say, hey, no, we need to lift everybody up. And I think the pinnacle of that was obviously Martin Luther King, right? It's not the color of your skin, it's the content of your character. And if you listen to him, he's kind of it's coming from his worldview, right?
It's so interesting because the conservatives, the Ted Cruz's of the world, would argue that today Dr. King would be a conservative because he wants to be colorblind. But many progressives,
right?
many progressives would argue that's a naive view. So that's interesting that your instinct about critical race theory is to say that it is to take a pretty hard line, right-wing view to say that it's pretty much a Marxist tool.
Yeah, and where you get the add in the critical layer subtext of intersectionality, and think about it. If you were trying to rapidly break down a very robust nation spread across demographics and all of that, what would you do? You'd create this little chart where you have to figure out, okay, I'm a white 59-year-old Christian with recovering from
kind of
strokes.
like deconstructing the identity that we were talking about.
Right. And then now I just need to go get mine. Right. I got to fight for mine. It's all power. We're all fighting over a pile. That's what critical race theory is. And now the guys at the top know what they're doing. I know it. This is not conspiratorial. There are people having meetings of like, how do we insert these at the right time using computer algorithms, etc., to figure out the timing of messages going out, the colors of things, the sounds of things, who says it, when they say it, all of that. And that's not, you can do that with computer software now, right? They're just figuring out, where do we divide? Where can we put a cut? Where can we put a cut? And the hope of a Leninist revolution, Marxist-Leninist revolution, is to actually have a complete collapse of society without the destruction of its infrastructure. And then the state, supposedly the state arises as like this nursemaid to help bring about a new growth where everybody's communal and they all get along. Well, but the only way that everybody's going to get along is if everybody agrees to think just like the party tells them to think.
Right.
And you remove our Western value of the individual as preeminent in our interactions in society to the state is preeminent, and it doesn't matter how many people die. We're trying to build this perfect state where one day the government will fade away and we'll have a workers' paradise. There are people that actually believe that can work. And they've even, Pol Pot killed tens of millions. She killed 150 million. I know about, we were in Tiananmen. I actually did live in Tianjin and by Beijing and went through Tiananmen. And I've seen the intelligence. In 1989, they just shot all these guys. They put them in a big pile. They burned them down to ashes and washed them down the drain, because the state is what matters, not the people. Now, the people as a whole, yes, but not individuals in any sense of the word. And so, but what you do, though, is you promise all these people out in these interest groups, look at all the things we're going to get you. but in fact, those things are never going to happen. They can't happen. You're just tearing down how you're going to have productivity to give everybody new houses once the federal government has taken over the means of construction equipment. They know it's not going to happen. It's just power, pure power.
So,
I want
so,
me. I want me.
so is there a Christian perspective on political economics, communism, capitalism?
I don't think the Bible worries too. The Bible does talk a lot about money, but you see lots of different systems. The Jewish system was probably similar to what we see in Western banking today. Not as sophisticated, all of that. But when it comes to Christianity and economics, I think it's the Bible doesn't pick one. The Old Testament, you see the Jewish economies were working basically like capitalism. You saw communal living by early Christians when they had converted and their families were throwing them out and they were being persecuted. They all kind of moved in and shared everything that they had. However, later you see that there's all sorts of these small businesses starting up. Some churches that supported themselves by selling fabric or working with oil or things like that. I think even the Bible talks about in the future, in this kingdom, it's probably metaphorical, but people bringing their goods in and out of the capital. That we're not going to just sit around on clouds and eat marshmallows. That it's going to be a real life. Things are going to have to move. It's probably going to be pretty cool, but we've still got to move things around. And that would obviously have payment and things like that. I think rather than the system, it goes back to, and I'm sorry to keep going back to the I versus myself versus others. Mm-hmm. If you actually had a bunch of people that decided, hey, we want to have a commune, and everybody honestly was ready to work with each other and can do it for 20 minutes, for 20 years. You could have like full on, hey, no ownership. We all own everything in common. We all take care of each other. But that requires that goodwill on the part of everybody.
The voluntarism.
Right. And that's why I think communism, aside from the fact that it removes God and replaces the state, but just as an economic system, you've got two problems. Is it just dampens things. And then the hubris of communism is to say that we could just get a bunch of big computers and accountants and figure out what everybody needs across the country, when in fact there's quadrillions of choices going on.
I guess what it comes down to is, I got to figure out, do I lean right because I have a more religious bent at this point in my life? And does that mean, what do I feel about Social Security? And, where do I fall on the spectrum? What's the proper role of government? This is what I got to figure out.
And I'm not sure. And the thing is I've been around long enough that labels are scooting. I was a Republican, but the neocons were really throwing me off the scent. And before I would have even voted for Bernie, I ended up voting for Trump. But in 2016, I could have voted for him because he tells you exactly what he thinks. And he said it for 30 years. And he's probably not going to change his mind. You can work with somebody like that.
Right.
So I think it's important to get away from just categorization. While that's important, is these terms are slipping around fast enough that I don't know if Republican and Democrat even are going to make any sense in a couple of years. It's just such a huge realignment. Who knows? We'll have the Bull Moose Party and the Everybody Wants Abortion Party. Sorry, I don't mean to be cynical.
No.
But I think everything's moving. And that's where it comes back to, well, if I know who I am, if I got that heuristic and that algorithm, I could kind of go into even some complex reading and understand what I think about it and see how I identify.
Right.
I think the other thing is to get away from the myth of the monolith. Everybody is like this. We know that's not true, but our heads do it, right? Oh, I saw this one meme and...
go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I saw this one meme and that makes me judge the entire character of that person. That's the purpose of the meme, is trying to make me do that, right? I have to try to not do that. Just, from one.
Well, I think the lesson I'm taking away from you is, the details will come, but you have to start at the beginning, your starting point, your foundations.
Yeah.
You
How much
don't
of
go
a
on.
reader are you? You
Not as
know,
big as I need to be. I'm starting to read again, and that's big. That's a huge part of my problem. That's why going to law
yeah.
school was so big for me, because I've been so lazy in my adult life.
And it's hard. Yeah, no, I get it. You're reading straight down the columns and stuff. Maybe a suggestion, just to kind of understand, is like, what is Western civilization all about? Thomas Aquinas, 1500s or 15th century, 1400s, wrote a number of books, but the first one that I think is important is called Summa Theologica, the summary of theology. It's not a overtly religious text. It's more about, okay, how can we think about the world? And he was truly Western. And
Mm.
I needed to understand my Western point of view when I went to Asia, because I just was rolling with it, right? It was like the breathing that I didn't notice.
Hmm.
And I had to understand, well, how did I get here? How did my culture get to this place, right? What are the things that are the ways we can look at it? Anyway, that's super long. It's 6,000 pages. You'll die before you get it done, unless you had to read it. There's another one called the Summa of the
Wait, it's a
Summa.
summary and it's 6,000 pages. My God.
No, this is only the short. There's a summary. It's a couple hundred pages, but there's another one by Dr. Peter Kreeft out of Boston College. He's one of their senior philosophy professors, been there forever. He wrote a thing called Summa of the Summa. Look for the one by Peter Kreeft. It's only about 80 pages long, and he brings in and he talks about what is reality, what is God when the
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian speaks, but all sorts of logical things too, things that you and I take for granted, but that I can guarantee you somebody in Southeast Asia would go, huh, that's different. I'll
Hmm.
give you one example. You go in that part of the world, contracts are not laughed at, but their contracts are more like gateways to further negotiation.
Hmm.
Whereas you and I decided we're going to be here at 4:30. I said, okay, I confirm. You sent me the link. I showed up. Right. And you'd say, well, that's completely normal. Well, they wouldn't be against it in Asia, but if you showed up a half hour late, it was just, well, okay, that's, it's
Hmm.
just going to happen because it's not part of the thing, this, yes, we're done. Now, there is a place, right, with Guanxi and things where you say, okay, we really got to do this. But mostly it's just kind of this flow. And well, why
Hmm.
do Westerners think that way? And why do uh, many people in the Oriental world think the way they do? Is it right? Is it wrong? Well, I don't think it's right or wrong. I'm just saying we have to understand how we think it. So that shorter summa, you can read just little things, and he writes it real pithily. Any of your
Hmm.
listeners, if you're just interested, and because the point is, guys like him, we don't talk about him much, but Augustine and Benedict, who basically got schools and farms started. He was the guy they started, rolling up all the documents and sending them to Ireland and everything. Um, there's some movers and shakers in history that get us to why we think like we think in the West. And if we know a little bit about that, be a
Hmm.
PhD, but get a sense of that, you can go, oh, and then I can transfer. I'm listening to some guy from Indonesia and he's telling me this, and I'm not judging him because he doesn't think like me. I'm trying to be humble so I can not think like him, but at least recognize that we're different.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah. So if you know how you think, if you know what your identity is, you know your worldview, a lot of this other stuff just becomes more organic.
Interesting. Well, I want to have you on another time to talk
Okay.
about some big topics such as apologetics. I want you to teach, like, I don't know what that word means. It sounds like a big topic.
It's to make a defense. It's Greek for making a defense.
Hmm.
So it's an
Interesting.
apologia. I make an apology. But in the Greek, the older Greek sense, it's like your legal defense um,
Interesting.
for something. So you could have apologetics for
Hmm.
almost anything. It's generally in the West starting to be glommed around religious studies, right? Apologetics for Islam or for, you know, Reformed Christianity or Catholic Christianity or whatever.
Well, so
But yeah,
maybe we touched upon a little bit of it, but I know it's one of your areas of expertise. So if you're interested, I'd love to have you back on to go into that. And philosophy, you have a huge philosophy background, also touched upon it, but
right.
I want to go deeper into those two subjects. But I want to ask a final question, kind of a fun one.
Sure.
Aliens, UAPs.
Yeah.
Tell me, nonsense, disinformation, secret military tech. You must have thoughts on this topic.
Sure. I'll go back to my worldview first. I have no problem with a personal creator having, it's a big universe, dude. Right. And so that could be part of it, is that there are other created beings in the universe that are just out traveling around.
Mm-hmm.
If we live like in a panspermia type environment where it was like ancient aliens that seeded the earth and we grew up, maybe they're coming to check on the project, like the old movies.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is an element, and then you get into, whether you believe it or not. I believe that there is actual good, and that good comes from the creative force of God. And I also believe that there's that which would tear down that good, and that's evil. The Bible says, actually, all world traditions talk about that there are spiritual beings that are either benign or doing good, or actually some are doing bad. Um, the Christian term might call them demons. And, I can't help but think, if all of this is true, and a whole bunch of good things might just be about to break loose in the most incredible country to ever exist in the history of the world, evil might want to stop that. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm talking about what are some of the concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And go listen to Tucker Carlson on some of this. And he talks about it in a few interviews where he says, I started to see enough that I didn't want to see anymore.
Right.
And that gets into science fiction-y movies or some woo kind of thing. But, if it's real, if there are aliens running around, some of them might not be very good people. And that's what Tucker Carlson was talking about.
Yeah, it's
On the
crazy.
other hand,
Go ahead.
I kind of leave it with this: is it's a super big universe, and if we don't blow up and this kingdom comes together that God's talking about, it says it's going to go on forever. I mean, we may live in a big universe for a reason, and we might become people like that, zipping around from galaxies to
Right.
galaxies someday. Technology, right? It's going pretty fast. Lon just put.
Yeah.
I watched that thing land. I'm an engineer, and I go, no.
Right.
How does somebody land a rocket that way on a tower? And that's where are we going to be in 10 years from there? We got
Right.
3 years to get the Starship going. Now in 10 years, you'll be going to Mars. Okay, we're based in Mars. Then we're going to go places. Be another 100 years. But yeah, we'll get there. It'll be like Star Trek.
It kind of It kind of ties into what we were saying earlier about how just where we are right now. We are obviously, everyone can always say we are now at the precipice of human understanding, and we are at
I
the
think you're right.
always
Yeah.
always the case. But we're not in the Stone Age anymore, and the
Right.
rate of change, all of that again. So it's a fascinating time, and all of these challenges, whether aliens are real, whether they're here, whether it's secret tech, whether it's a number of things. This seems like a
Right.
time of upheaval or change. People talk
Yeah.
about the fourth turning.
Well, I think you're right. I'm not super up on the idea, but the idea of mega waves in society, we're seeing it now. There is a reawakening to freedom of speech and things. Something's happened in parts of Europe and also in America where people are starting to say, no, I don't believe that, so I'm not going to pretend I do. Not even like,
Right.
okay, you want to be a trans person? Great, I love you. You're my neighbor, but please don't ask me to force me to celebrate that, right? Just like, you
Right.
have to celebrate my Christianity and my belief that you're going to hell for that kind of behavior, right? That would be stupid. How in the world would I want to shove that down their throat? And I think people are awakening to truth. And I think if somehow, I think AI is going to actually help in certain ways, we'll be able to establish a secure environment where people will be able to talk, something like X,
Right.
going into the future. If that happens, yeah, it could be a really good time for a lot of people in the world. You get truth and a couple million people moving in the same
Right.
direction.
Hmm.
It can't be stopped.
Oh, I love that. I love your optimism. I really appreciate it. And you never want to, and I really appreciate how you're obviously so loving to all people, and people who are trans or feel trans or have these conditions. You empathize with them, and
Well, here's my rule. Are you breathing? Okay, then you're worthy of my goodwill. I might not do it well or whatever, but that's my stance. And so when I behave like I think I believe, sure, you just, yeah, you're worthy of my attention. You break your ankle, I'm going to help you out.
And it's not about these people. It's about the government tilting the scale for that worldview.
Right.
That's really what it's about.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of details to figure out, but what are your first principles? And let's make sure the only first principles the government is pushing are the ones in the Constitution.
Right. And remember, the Bill of Rights is not an enumeration or sorry, a conference of rights. It's an enumeration of already extant rights.
Right.
Right. The First Amendment is not permission from the government. It's limitation on the government.
Right.
And yeah, if we can just run that way, but we're always going to have, we've all got our foibles, right? Oh, I can never be corrupted by power. Really? I don't know. Maybe I couldn't, but I probably could. You put a couple $1 million in my pocket and I might speak a little nicer about somebody.
Right.
Subtle. And it does, but then you get it's like a traffic jam. You start getting corruption and it just bang, 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 bang. But if you're just running on truth and good information, that's where I look at like Elon. He says, yeah, I think we can take $2 trillion out of the budget.
Right.
No doubt. Zero doubt. And quite frankly, he could do it. And like those good bureaucrats who have been there trying to serve their country. And he calls them up and he says, what are your ideas? And they go, I wish somebody asked me this 7 years ago. Here's what we can do. They look at it, boom, get a couple people off the team, move them somewhere else. And all of a sudden things are going through in one day instead of 12. Why? Truth, caring about people, listening to each other, respecting. All of those things happen instead of just regulations down from the top that you sit there and just try to accommodate. And it gets all spun around each other. So
we have a lot more to cover in our next chat, but you've made me feel better. You've made me feel like I'm not on the wrong path. You've encouraged me. You seem like a very nice person with a lot of love in your heart, and it seems like I'm not a bad person in your estimation for making this.
How would I ever think that? Oh no, I'm going to vote for Trump. I mean, I'm an absolute MAGA guy. I'm become, even in my old age, a little bit of a prepper. It's not crazy, but all of that, because I do think we need to understand that there's people. It's already been proven that somehow out of nowhere we can just have cities go on fire, and more truth and more good-heartedness and all of that, and those fires will turn to trees being planted. That would be great. And I do have optimism, but yeah, we can crash this country pretty bad if we get into it's not just Kamala Harris is going to destroy the world. That system, that way of thinking, everything in the bureaucracy is about self-preservation and power. And the people are fighting that government for their intersectional piece of the pie. It can't go anywhere. It can't build anything. And that's why you have 3 million people and it takes you 6 months to get a permit from the federal government on something. Yeah.
Well, you're exhibit A in terms of proving that MAGA folk are good people and intelligent people, worldly people, not ignorant people at all. So it's really important that you joined me, and I appreciate it. You're a good example. Man. Yeah, no. It's really been good. We got a lot more to cover, like I said, next time.
Okay.
But I appreciate it. It's a good example of big difference.
Share it, right? One last thing. Jefferson talked about it. Pluralism. Harvard's even started another versus tolerance. Pluralism is the idea that I can actively be against your view. Guy's a Satanist, I'm a Christian. Well, obviously we have a very different point of view. So much so that we really don't have anything to talk about when it comes to religion. But he's an American. So therefore I will defend his right to believe what he wants with all my strength.
Right.
Maybe even up to and including the ultimate sacrifice. And I think that's a better place where people can play. Not just, let people have everything. No, challenge each other. But also be willing to say, hey, back off. Somebody comes up and starts yelling at a very reasonable Hamas protester, very reasonable person, right? They start screaming at him. I do not agree with Hamas ideology, but I would hopefully step around and say, hey, bro, back off.
Right.
That lady's telling me what she thinks. you know.
Right.
And if we can do that instead of, oh, you're a Nazi because you went to a rally,
Right.
you know, we'll get a lot farther.
Basic courtesy goes a long way. It's tough. These are trying times, man.
Yeah.
You would know
One
more
day
than
at a
I.
time. One
Yep.
day at a time. All right, man.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
It's so nice to meet you.
Yeah, pleasure.
All right.